So, Ji-Hawk's search for a way to get rich has led him to idols. He's realized that popularity is the key. After all, you don't have to be a celebrity to be famous if you're rich enough. People will notice you. But if Ji-Hawk is already getting attention, why not make the most of it? Ji-Hawk decided to strike while the iron was hot. He immediately grabbed his phone and started dialing. When he finally got through to his employees, he said, "Starting tomorrow, we're increasing the amount of monster bones we buy." The voice on the other end asked, "By how much?" Ji-Hawk, glancing at his phone's balance, already had the answer. Ji-Hawk decided to spend his damn 32 million won. He announced that from now on, he would invest every profit into buying more bones. He also instructed his team to handle the bones as carefully as possible. Chief Pack, the wholesaler, assured him that he would now collect the freshest bones available. With the bone-buying business settled, Ji-Hawk realized he needed a proper company to manage everything. Instead of renting a warehouse, starting a company, and distributing bones daily, Ji-Hawk decided to go all out. He wanted to roll out everything at once. Meanwhile, at the Gate Management Bureau, specifically in the office of the Awakened Registration Director, Young Sunday Han, a routine check was underway. Young asked if there was anything notable to report. A researcher initially said there was nothing special, but then mentioned something that caught his attention. A special management case involving Ji-Hawk, who creates transporter skeletons. Recent records showed that Ji-Hawk had produced 32 skeletons last month. Director Young asked why this was being brought up now. The researcher explained that Ji-Hawk had recently started a company called Saren, which was scheduled to open today. Impressed, Director Young remarked. Director Young remarked that success depends on how a person utilizes their abilities. He added that no one could have imagined using weak skeletons in such a clever way, and noted that Ji-Hawk must now have a substantial amount of money if he's starting a company. The researcher informed him that Ji-Hawk's monthly earnings could reach billions of Korean won, given that his summoning rate had exceeded all limits. He suggested removing Ji-Hawk from the special management list. Their discussion was interrupted when another researcher rushed in, excitedly asking Director Young if he'd heard the news. Director Young assumed he was referring to Ji-Hawk and his company, saying he just heard about it. However, the researcher clarified that it wasn't about the transporter skeletons, it was about Ji-Hawk recently summoning a large number of transporters and deploying them randomly. Director Young commented that this meant the number 32 wasn't his maximum, and Ji-Hawk had likely set a new record. The first researcher added that Ji-Hawk had broken the record from a month ago, as his previous summoning count had reached 27, which was astonishing. He proposed keeping Ji-Hawk on the special management list for monitoring. However, the second researcher objected vehemently, slamming the desk in frustration. Director Young asked, "What's the number now?" He wanted to know how many skeletons Ji-Hawk had summoned to cause such a commotion. The researcher replied that the count wasn't 30 or even 62. He revealed that Ji-Hawk had summoned 300 skeletons, and that was only what they had been able to observe so far. Director Young and the researchers immediately headed to Ji-Hawk's company headquarters. As soon as they stepped out of the car, the director was stunned by the sight before him. Hundreds of skeletons were spread across the area. The researcher informed him that he had just finished surveying the site and confirmed that the number of skeletons had already surpassed 350. Director Young asked where Ji-Hawk was, and the researcher replied that he was inside the warehouse. When the director entered the warehouse, he discovered even more skeletons. Ji-Hawk noticed the visitors and told his workers to take a break, as it was also lunchtime. Addressing the director, he suggested providing a lavish meal to celebrate their first task and handed him his card. Then, Ji-Hawk turned to Director Young and asked if he was from the management office. He introduced himself as Han Ji-Hawk. One of the researchers approached and asked Ji-Hawk if he remembered him, reminding him that he had conducted his. Ji-Hawk responded that he did remember him. The researcher noticed SAA standing next to Ji-Hawk and asked about her. Ji-Hawk explained that she was his cousin and had come to help with the work. The researcher greeted SAA and then asked Ji-Hawk if all the skeletons present were actual summons. Ji-Hawk confirmed this. The researcher informed him that their team had recorded over 350 skeletons. Ji-Hawk replied that this was likely accurate. The researcher then questioned whether Ji-Hawk had lied during the evaluation test. Ji-Hawk firmly denied this, explaining that he had never expected to summon such a large number. Director Young intervened, instructing Ji-Huk to stop his activities immediately. He explained that summoning 100 skeletons was already impressive, but surpassing 350 exceeded natural and logical boundaries. He noted that an F-class awakened shouldn't be capable of such feats. Confidently, Ji-Huk asked why he should stop. Director Young stated that the issue was evident and considered the situation problematic. Ji-Huk interrupted, asserting that it wasn't a problem for him. He pointed out that he had consulted a lawyer while establishing his company to review all summoning-related laws. Ji-Huk clarified that the laws don't impose a limit on the number of summons. Director Young countered by mentioning safety precautions. Ji-Huk reassured him, emphasizing that these were the same skeletons he had been using before without any objections. He questioned why the matter was being raised now. Director Young quietly asked the researcher if there was any issue with letting Ji-Huk continue. The researcher responded that the laws had never anticipated such large-scale summoning. Ji-Huk cut in, stating that his company had been established legally and lawfully. He referenced the special law allowing the rental of abilities for profit, adding that safety wasn't a concern since those who used the skeletons could vouch for their reliability. Therefore, there was no problem. Summoning 300 skeletons daily was no easy task. Sarcastically, he commented that he wanted to retire to stop working. Yet now he had to work even harder to achieve that retirement. As he was lost in thought, the sound of a knock on the door interrupted him. Manager Kang entered the room, looking flustered. He informed Gu about a major problem happening outside. Curious about the issue, Gu asked Kang to explain. Kang revealed that a large number of porters from other regions were protesting outside the company. Shocked by the mention of protests, Gu instructed Kang to act quickly. The demonstration was sparked by the rise of skeletal transporters, which led to significant losses for human porters. People found these skeletons to be a more cost-effective and efficient option, making human porters unnecessary. The porters felt that their job opportunities were already limited by automation, but now, this situation had completely destroyed their livelihoods, forcing them to travel to distant gates for work. They accused the company, Siron, of stealing their jobs by using skeletal transporters and demanded that CEO Hanji Gu protect their rights. When Gu appeared before the protesters, he addressed them respectfully, assuring them that he understood their concerns and invited them to come inside for a calm discussion. Inside the meeting room, Gu acknowledged that their protest was about job-related issues and asked them to share their grievances. The leader of the protest explained that the porters were struggling because of the overwhelming presence of skeletal transporters in the market. He added that many had to work in remote locations due to the decline in available jobs. Now, let's dive into how Gu plans to tackle this problem and support the human porters. The problem could not be solved, and as such, Gu simply decided to stop producing skeletons to give regular people a chance to make money. He asked manager Kang to bring some papers and pens, and Kang eagerly complied. Thrilled that the issue had been resolved smoothly and peacefully, Kang looked at Gu with admiration, seeing him as a remarkable leader capable of handling crises without causing harm to anyone. Having reduced the impact of the skeletal transporter project, Gu began to think of new ways to earn money. He wanted to find a new product that could be easily produced, one unrelated to combat like the skeletons, and that wouldn't threaten existing jobs. Recalling Kang's description of him as a considerate and respectful leader, Gu felt frustrated by his seemingly endless bad luck. While jotting down ideas and specifications for the new product, something caught his attention and sparked a new idea. He noticed that the pen he was writing with had the label, "Made in China." Checking his notebook, he found the same phrase printed on it. Even his coffee mug carried the same label. Suddenly, an idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. Why not produce items that are currently imported from abroad? This would eliminate concerns about competition from other countries. A few days later, at a nearby shoe factory close to the Siron company, director Kim Deok-bae was reflecting on the factory's rich history, passed down through generations. However, he admitted that he was facing tough times competing with China's low production costs. Director Kim was worried about managing labor costs as he pondered a critical decision. Suddenly, his secretary rushed in and asked if he had heard about the skeletons and the Siron company in the industrial complex. Director Kim responded that he had indeed heard of the company and felt a twinge of envy. They seemed able to turn a profit effortlessly. He wished he could find a way to change his own life too. Just then, a voice interrupted him, disagreeing with the idea that they were merely lucky. To his surprise, it was Gu who introduced himself and expressed his pleasure in meeting Director Kim. Gu shared that he had recently taken an interest in the factory and wanted to learn more about its operations, as he was considering acquiring it. Director Kim was taken aback by Gu's bold statement, but quickly recognized it as a golden opportunity. He eagerly agreed and offered to give Gu a tour of the factory to explain everything, starting with a walk through the main areas. As they walked, Director Kim explained the processes involved in manufacturing shoes, expressing his desire to sell the factory for the benefit of the workers. He elaborated on how the first step included using the machines in the back to cut out the individual parts of the shoes. Next, the parts were sewn together using the available machines. Gu commented that the machines looked a bit outdated. Director Kim, feeling a bit embarrassed, assured him that the workers were highly skilled and could handle the machine's limitations. He pointed out that this was actually better than relying on faulty modern machines. Gu appreciated this point and encouraged him to continue. Director Kim explained that after the workers finished making the shoes, all the pieces were assembled and stitched together in one place. He mentioned that while the process seemed simple, it got more complicated when you looked at the details. Gu turned to Seiya and said the work seemed manageable and much easier than producing combat equipment. He then asked Director Kim if all the work was done by hand or if there were any machines involved. Director Kim replied that while the cutting process could be automated, everything else was done manually. He expressed some concern about the ratio of workers to production. If Gu wanted to run the factory at full capacity, he would need to hire more staff. Right now, they had 20 workers, but at one point, the number had reached as high as 100. Gu remarked that 100 workers seemed like a good number and asked how sales were managed. Director Kim explained that most of their production was based on client orders. This gives the audience a clear and engaging understanding of the factory's operations and challenges, while keeping it simple and relatable. The factory adjusted its basic designs to meet specific needs. Gu asked if they could produce inventory in advance and sell it later. Director Kim replied that it was possible, but warned that unsold stock could lead to losses. He added that predicting demand for small shoe factories like theirs was tough. Gu chuckled, saying that Director Kim was refreshingly honest. Director Kim laughed back, saying he had nothing to hide. Gu then inquired if they could produce large quantities of low-cost shoes for export using inexpensive labor. Director Kim explained that it wasn't that simple because major brands choose countries with low-cost labor for specific reasons. Gu clarified that his question might have been misunderstood and asked for a straightforward answer. Would the idea work or not? Director Kim replied that it likely would, as cheap products always find a market. Satisfied with this answer, Gu told Director Kim he was ready to buy the factory immediately. He prepared the necessary paperwork and asked if the factory was officially his now. Director Kim reviewed the documents and was deeply moved when he saw that Gu had kept him on as the factory's director while retaining all the existing employees. He thanked Gu profusely and promised to do his best to secure orders and find new clients. He assured Gu that he would repay his kindness one day. Gu told Director Kim that there was no need for so much gratitude because he already planned to build up inventory and sell it directly through exports. He then used his summoning ability to call forth. Gu introduces the skeletons to Director Kim as the factory's new employees. He asks Director Kim to teach them the details of the work, assuring him that they will follow orders without hesitation. Touched by this gesture, Director Kim describes Gu as an angel rather than a human. The skeletons immediately begin working as soon as Director Kim gives the required commands. He remarks that the factory hasn't been this lively in a long time and credits the revival to the new CEO. Gu responds modestly, saying there's no need for such praise since it's Director Kim who resolved all the issues. Director Kim admits he was initially surprised and never expected skeletons to be employed in the factory. He asks Gu if this is even legal. Gu assures him that they are not breaking any laws. He then shifts the focus, suggesting they examine the shoes being produced and evaluate their quality. Director Kim inspects the shoe and admits it's better than he expected, although not on par with handmade craftsmanship. Gu asks Director Kim to stop giving vague answers and point out exactly what the problems are and what needs to be corrected. Director Kim highlights that the stitching is weak and has gaps. Gu promptly addresses the issue by giving new instructions to the skeletons. Afterward, a new shoe is produced, and Gu presents it to Director Kim for inspection eager to see if it meets the standards. In this segment, Director Kim confirms that all the flaws he pointed out have been fixed. Gu expresses his satisfaction, saying that if they keep learning from their mistakes, the shoes will become easy to sell. The best part? The skeletons don't require any labor costs, which saves a lot of money in production. Director Kim agrees, highlighting that cutting down on labor costs is a huge win. This improvement allows them to compete with Chinese products in terms of price, even in the export markets. He adds that if they keep building their reputation, they could land OEM, original equipment manufacturer contracts, with major brands. Surprised, Gu asks about these contracts. He thought big brands made their products themselves. Director Kim explains that these brands usually focus on design, while factories like theirs take care of manufacturing and delivery. Gu is amazed, realizing that they don't need to create any new designs. They just need to focus on making high-quality shoes. As time goes by, the Siron shoe factory buzzes with activity, handling more and more orders. They even acquire a few other shoe factories to expand their operations, keeping Gu incredibly busy around the clock. At the end of another tiring workday, Gu comes home, reflecting on all the progress they've made. As Gu is settling in for the night, he receives a call from Director Kim. Kim apologizes for calling so late, but has news about a new order that requires changes to the production lines. Tired but determined, Gu assures Director Kim that he will head back to the factory right away. Kim feels a bit embarrassed for bringing up the adjustments so late, especially since they had nearly finished the previous order. Gu realizes that the growing workload is taking a toll not just on the business, but also on the team. He thinks about training a new person to help out, but quickly acknowledges that they don't have the time or energy for that. Training someone would be a big effort. Increasing the number of skeletons isn't an easy fix either. It's becoming harder to find new corpses, and bringing in more might attract attention. If people found out Gu was using skeletons, it could hurt his reputation. He still needs to refine the basic framework and get the required work units ready. While thinking about this, Gu suddenly comes up with a brand new idea. A few days later, the factory holds a day dedicated to interviewing new employees, including a candidate named Beck. Gu asks Sang-ho to sit down and starts going over his resume. He notices that Sang-ho doesn't have much experience. Gu notices that Sang-ho's experience mostly comes from part-time jobs. He asks Sang-ho if he has any special skills. Sang-ho feels nervous, realizing he doesn't have any standout abilities. He hesitates, unsure if the skills needed should relate directly to the job. Seeing Sang-ho's long silence, Gu reassures him that it's not a big deal. Suddenly, Sang-ho blurts out that he has a special skill. When Gu asks what it is, Sang-ho hesitantly admits he's good at games. Feeling embarrassed, Sang-ho wonders why he brought it up. Gu asks what makes him skilled at games, and Sang-ho reluctantly explains that he plays all kinds of games and can easily reach top rankings. However, he thinks it might be better to stop talking to avoid rambling on. Gu follows up by asking if he enjoys simulation and building games, and Sang-ho confirms that those are his favorites. Gu asks if Sang-ho has anything to showcase his skills, and Sang-ho mentions that he has some videos he can share. He opens one video and explains that the game involves assembling golem parts. But here's the exciting part: that created a flying machine using those parts and made it work. Sang-ho talks about the game's advanced physics engine. He points to a motor beneath a fan-like structure, which is actually a golem's arm piece, but it has great thrust power. He explains that designing this required creativity because he had to repurpose parts for completely different functions to build a mechanical device. Feeling uncertain about the interview, Sang-ho wonders if he should look for another company. But then Gu surprises him by enthusiastically saying he's hired on the spot. Gu asks if Sang-ho can start the next day. Overjoyed, Sang-ho confirms and thanks Gu for this amazing opportunity. On his first day, things don't start off well. Sang-ho struggles to understand a skeletal structure on the desk. Gu explains that this structure is basically like a computer, but Sang-ho is shocked and still unconvinced. Gu clarifies that the structure is actually a control unit. He begins demonstrating how the skeletal framework works on the desk, explaining that this revised script captures the excitement and challenges Sang-ho faces, making it relatable for viewers while keeping them engaged in his journey. The lever makes the skeleton move accordingly. Gu assures Sang-ho that he'll teach him how to operate it, and afterward, Sang-ho can program a gymnastics routine for the skeleton. The deadline for this task is 1 week. Despite feeling confused, Sang-ho accepts the challenge. The control unit given to Sang-ho looks like a regular game controller, but it's actually the skeleton of a deceased mage. Unlike regular skeletons, skeletal mages can use basic magic. The device has buttons and levers for operation, but the controls are a bit tricky since it was put together quickly. Surprisingly, Gu is amazed when Sang-ho completes the task 2 days before the deadline, proving he was the right choice for the job. Gu asks Sang-ho for feedback on using the device, which is still in its experimental phase, and requests that he point out any flaws or difficulties. Excitedly, Sang-ho starts listing his thoughts. And we'll find out what happens next in the next installment. Good luck!